to the Boropolis podcast. As usual, I am joined with Nathan, and unfortunately, Middlesbrough fans, we do have to talk about Chelsea 6, Middlesbrough 1. It finished 6-2 on aggregate, though, so I mean, that sounds a little bit better, I suppose. The moment we all waited for, the moment that a few of us had sort of tricked our own minds into believing that we had somewhat of a chance of pulling off the unthinkable. It really sort of turned us round, slapped us in the face and said, don't be so ridiculous. It was never going to happen. Nathan, I usually ask how you're doing at the start of these podcasts, but after a near enough, 16-hour coach journey, or probably what felt like even more hours, I don't even know how long it was in the end, I can't imagine you doing that well, following that performance as well.
Yeah, a bit of a strange one, really. Mixed emotions. Um, I had a top day out yesterday, despite the result. A new ground to tick off for myself. Um, yes, okay. The sort of duration of the journey back up the country was a little bit despairing, if I'm honest. And getting back at 4 o'clock at 4 o'clock this morning, and then having to get up for work a few hours later was a bit rough. However, yeah, it's one of those games where you don't want to go into it with any real expectation or hope, really, because it will bite you on the arse. And a few people that I was with did have that hope and expectation. I was quite reserved in my overall feeling on the game, just sort of pretended like I wasn't that bothered and that it doesn't sort of define our season at all. It's just another sort of avenue that we've gone down, and if we get all the way, then it'd be a massive bonus and something that we'd be incredibly proud of. But yeah, it wasn't to be. As expected, their quality shone through in the end. Um, they're a club where when we drew them in the semi-finals, my honest view was that they'd absolutely have the way with us over both legs, because when it gets to the serious stages of competitions, teams like Chelsea don't mess about. They make sure that they get to Wembley and they win trophies at the end of the day, no matter how good or bad they are. So yeah, was expecting to be on the end of a beating yesterday, but possibly not as harsh of a beating as it did turn out to be.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that their quality shone through, and I do think that's true to a certain extent. But I guess without sounding too negative, I think the real frustrations were probably the fact that had we have performed the way we did last night against championship opposition, we'd have probably been on the receiving end of a defeat in any case. We might as well jump straight into it. And I mean, it doesn't feel long ago at all now that we were previewing the game and saying, well, if we can stay in it until this time or stay in it until that time, we might stand a chance and the crowd will start turning this, that, and the other. But we always knew it was going to be difficult, especially without Isaiah Jones. Of course, following the game, Michael Carrick admitted that pretty much as soon as Isaiah Jones had come off and told him what injury he was suffering from, he knew he wasn't going to make even the squad on Tuesday night. It was all a bit of sort of trying to double bluff and catch Chelsea out. And to be honest, I think Middlesbrough fans knew, if you know anything about sort of any kind of injury, whether it be football or running or whatever, you know that any sort of problems with a hamstring, you're not going to recover from that in the space of days. It's always going to be a case of weeks. Obviously, Johnny Howson did make the team. We'd spoken about him potentially filling in at that right wing back role. Of course, he didn't. Middlesbrough sort of opted with a four, and Michael Carrick's hands were forced in this situation. You know, there was not really any other sort of fit and available, or at least match fit player that could do the role that Isaiah Jones had done in the previous game against Chelsea and, of course, against Aston Villa. And I think a large part of the problems, especially in the first half, yes, okay, there were some individual errors, but I think not being able to sort of play with a natural right-sided centre half that had one job in the game affected us massively. And Johnny Howson sort of being tasked with the responsibility of playing in midfield and then reverting into sort of a right-sided centre-half role whilst keeping an eye on Enzo Fernandez ended up being, to put it nicely, somewhat of a car crash, really, first half.
Yeah, I think obviously we'd seen in the home game against Chelsea and in the Villa game as well with the five, we looked like a really sort of well drilled side in that formation. Um, Obviously very different to what we'd usually go with, but we looked a lot more solid. We had obviously our three defenders in there, which was usually a five in defence, but then you have your width, and we had pace out wide as well with Bangura and Jones in those games, packing the midfield with your three in there, and then pace up top. And unfortunately, a couple of players out missing. You just you can't sort of do anything about that. But yeah, Carrick had to sort of just go with what he had, and it's a real shame that that had to be the case because I did feel that if we had that pace in the second leg, that we'd be able to cause them probably a few more problems than we did, which was little at all, really. But yeah, you had to go with what we had. Obviously, in terms of that midfield, it was nowhere near as packed and congested as it was in that first leg. Um, Caicedo and Fernandez completely got the better of our midfield yesterday. Just ran all over them, really. But I suppose we'll get onto it. But the naivety of playing the exact same way as you would against Rotherham, and you're playing Chelsea away from home, who you've just played 90 minutes against. You saw that they wanted to press you all over the pitch. In any minute of the game, they were pressing you. And we decided that we were still going to play at a ridiculously slow and measured pace. You can't, and evidently you can't do that. And anyone could have told you that before the game, apart from evidently our players in midfield who just wanted all the time in the world on the ball. Um, but yeah, it's a harsh lesson learned, I suppose, that there is a gulf between sort of us and them, and they're not necessarily the top of the Premier League either. They're just a Premier League side at this moment in time. So yeah, it's a real sort of wake up call to anyone that thinks that if we got promoted, we'd have any sort of chance of competing with players like that week in, week out. Because yes, you can play nice, attractive football in the Championship and it can look relatively good on the eye. But as you've seen with Burnley, they absolutely obliterated this league last year by doing relatively similar things to what we do at this moment in time. And they've gone up, tried to do the same thing, and have been absolutely battered from pillar to post every weekend. So, yeah, last night we found out a lot of things in terms of our style of play, a few of our players being able to make that step up. And I think it probably will have knocked a lot of their confidences as well. Some people that may have perhaps thought that they were in in a bracket where they were a top level championship player, but the level from a top championship player to a bottom half Premier League player is a massive, massive gap.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, isn't it? There's a few things to pick out from what you're saying there. And obviously some people might think, well, these are the same players which managed to beat Chelsea in the first leg. And of course that is true. But I think even in the first leg, you look at some of the big chances that Chelsea missed. And in hindsight, you get carried away and we get the goal through Hackney and hold on and defended really well in the second half. And actually, they had that much possession in the second half. It almost suited us just to basically sit on the edge of our box and defend. Whereas last night, before a goal had been scored, and throughout the game, really, what was strange is the fact that, of course, the way that the game was going was completely different as well. We quite quickly gave up the advantage that we had and then were quite quickly behind. So, I think that there's also a sort of bigger argument about managers and teams sticking to their principles and, regardless of the occasion, making sure that they play the way that they feel is right. There's another argument within that, whether, teams, and this isn't just us. Obviously, we learned a harsh lesson last night, but as you say, Burnley, there's been a lot of media talk about Vincent Kompany and whether he has enough of a plan B to deal with the sort of more difficult teams. And I say more difficult, but even some of the teams lower down the Premier League, as you say, I think last night did prove one thing, and it was that there's such a massive gap from where we are. And then there's another gap between where we are and where the likes of Leicester are. And then there's an even bigger gap between that and the teams that are sitting sort of middle of the pack or slightly lower, even in the Premier League, which is quite frightening, really, when you consider how, we're trying to get in the playoffs and there's still an awful lot of games to play. There's transfers and whatnot to still hopefully materialise. But at the moment, with injuries, of course, added as well, it did feel like a little bit of a reality check last night, didn't it? And I think what we said in the previous podcast was that, try and stay in the game for as long as possible. And what was most frustrating about the whole occasion was the fact it was sort of ripped away from us so quickly. I mean, to be 4-0 down at half time was pretty gut-wrenching, wasn't it? And I think, as you say, confidence, as much as, yes, they are a club that have spent, nearly £250 million on players, the confidence is still going to take a hit from that. And I just hope that, especially with a scoreline like that, even we saw it with Brighton last season, but I think the manner of some of the goals that you conceded, I just hope that doesn't sort of seep in and, carry over towards the Sunderland game. Because another thing which isn't good at all is we don't have a game on Saturday and we can't really have that immediate chance to bounce back. You do worry a little bit whether that'll stew on a few of their minds, a few of the individual errors that happened. I'd like to think it won't, but I think subconsciously, I can't see how it wouldn't have some sort of a detrimental effect to the confidence of the squad.
Yeah, possibly. I think you probably, if we did have a game this weekend, you probably would have seen probably a slow start. And that's nothing sort of out the ordinary for us. We do start relatively slow in games, but I think it'd have been probably a little bit more blatant than usual. Probably sloppy passes going astray and all sorts, which would be a sign of that low confidence. And yeah, I suppose when you do have that game, as you say, ripped away from you in, well, 40 minutes, it's yeah, it will damage your confidence. And obviously you're being told to play a certain way. And yes, you're sticking to your principles, but there's a time and a place. And away at Stamford Bridge, when you've got a 1-0 lead and a tie, it's probably not not the time to sort of play out from the back and just invite them to come and press you. We didn't have a long ball in behind yesterday, which was a shame. That would have been get out of jail to play over the top of their defence and get some pace in behind. With Matt Crooks, you don't have that. It's a real sort of shame the way that it did happen, especially that first half, really. Um, Being 4-0 down and getting beat 4-0 would have been enough for me. But to then have to sort of suffer another 45 minutes of it, not knowing what was going to happen when the boys come back out the tunnel at half time, whether the confidence would just be completely shot and they'd just sort of roll over and get beat 10. I really didn't know. But honestly, credit to them for coming out and sort of just standing up to it a little bit. And okay, we hardly had a kick in the second half, and Chelsea didn't have to get out of even first gear in the second half. But yeah, I was fearing the absolute worst at half time. And yes, 6 is awful, like really bad. But when it gets to 7, 8, 9s, it's yeah, that I think at that point it's embarrassing. But yeah, weirdly, you sort of reflect and sort of see different people's views on it. Some people are embarrassed. Okay, fine, but you've got a very young group of players here that are currently sat in mid-table in the championship, not anywhere around the top of the table, not in the playoffs by 10 points like teams like Ipswich are. We're 3 points off the playoffs, but sat in a middle of the road pack with teams like Preston, Watford. So you have to bear that in mind. We are not the super team that everyone sort of perhaps with their Middlesbrough tinted glasses on thinks that we are. And you're playing a side, as mentioned, that when it gets to serious rounds of cup competitions, they just don't take the piss for the most part. They get things done, no matter how badly they've performed in the league. Yes, okay, they're sat in mid-table in the Premier League, possibly a false position, really, because they've got a new manager in. He's trying to deal with all the sort of bullshit that's going on around the ownership and having to bed in about 30 new players every 6 months because Chelsea just continue to sign players. Um, but yeah, by no means am I embarrassed by the result. I think that it could have been worse if you look at how they performed in that first leg and you reflect on the amount of chances that Parma missed in that first leg, if they go on and beat us 3-1 in that first leg, okay, perhaps it doesn't have to go to 6 in the second leg, and they can just sort of sit back and just keep the ball away from us. But yeah, by no means embarrassed. Just think that there is a slight little bit of naivety from uh, the players, Michael Carrick himself as well, to continue to play the way that we do in the Championship against a side that are full of seasoned international players that cost hundreds of millions of pounds between a lot of them. So yeah,
Yeah, obviously another sort of key point about the whole night, and we couldn't not talk about it, was that away end. Obviously, you were part of it, and from my perspective, sat at home watching the game. Listen, I can't take my hat off more to the 4,000 that travelled down there. You included, Nathan, um, especially in the times that we are currently. To go that far, the cost of going to London, trains, etc. I mean, travel at the best of times now is really, really untrustworthy. So, in fact, I actually saw a group of Middlesbrough fans that had the trains cancelled even yesterday morning, still managed to make it at the game. So, I mean, just a huge fair play from me, and I'm sure all the fans who maybe couldn't get tickets or had work commitments or things like that, and even, were at the Riverside for the first leg and filled that ground up. But I think a special mention to that away following yesterday, because I mean, you don't get many clubs who are 6 goals down and are the loudest group of fans in that stadium, and really just soaking in, and I guess towards the end, sort of celebrating what has been, as you say, a nice little distraction from the league. We dared to dream. Of course, we didn't get all the way in the end. We got a little bit of reality check, but as we've said, it's always nice to dream a little bit. And along the way, we've had some really good moments. And I think, do you know what? As much as I'm a Fairweather Cup fan, I openly admit it, maybe it's probably changed my opinion on the cup because of this run. And it's easy to say that because we've got the semi-finals and we had that night at the Riverside. But when you think of how important the earlier rounds of this cup run were to our season, it can't be underestimated that, had we have gone out to a Huddersfield or gone out to a Bowling, when we weren't winning in the league either, it could have been all so much more toxic, and we didn't have that sort of distraction. So I think that's probably something that I would take away from this cup run. And yeah, that, along with just hearing that Middlesbrough end at 6-0 down yesterday, was probably the two highlights, as well as the Hackney goal. Sorry, I'll group them into three of the cup run. I mean, it'll be interesting to hear your opinions and obviously your sort of highs of what we're just going to call now a lovely distraction throughout the season.
yeah. I mean, it is for the most part, as a Middlesbrough fan, a pleasure to go and support them away from home. Over the years, we've had plenty of good days. We've had a few bad days as well. And despite the result yesterday probably being the worst result I've ever seen from a Middlesbrough side, travelling away from home, it'll be by no means the worst game that I've been to. And that sort of fits into a point that I'm going to make about the sort of just the disparity between both sort of clubs that were in the semi-final. Obviously, nearly 5,000 Borough fans down there yesterday who just sung their hearts out for the full duration of the game, even going down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and really the players have got their backs up against the wall, and I just hope that they know that like no matter what and how that game went yesterday, that for the most part the fans just aren't really that fussed about the result. As you mentioned, it's been a nice distraction. Okay, yes, we would have all liked to have our day out at Wembley with the possibility of winning a cup, but to get as far as we have as a championship side, and I mean in the first leg actually beat them at the Riverside, it's gave us a very special night, um, and a good few other Tuesday evenings where we've come off the back of wins as well. So yeah, but just on the sort of disparity between the sides, and an interesting point that my brother made actually, as we were walking back to our coach yesterday, was that he wasn't necessarily disappointed by the result, but he just feels that the possibility of us ever closing that gap from us to Chelsea or any other side in the top half of the Premier League in terms of the quality level, it just seems like that is a million miles away. And like, look, yesterday, the Borough fans stayed right till the end for the most part. Okay, a few left and got earlier trains home, which fair play to them. It was probably a good idea because it saved them a 5-hour trip home on the coach, like me. Um, but seeing that home end yesterday, and yes, I know that it's a big club, and with that, it attracts foreign visitors who have come for a day out, and they've seen the stadium, they've seen the team score a disgusting amount of goals past us. And I mean, the game was done at half time, but just sort of seeing that at the end and seeing on the big screen, we're going to Wembley and the ground being half empty, I just don't think I could ever do that as a fan of a football club. If you're making the effort to go to the match and you've just got to a major cup fight, I know it's I'm talking as a fan that yes, okay, we've been to cup finals in my lifetime, but sort of I wasn't old enough to remember them days. But to be in a major cup final and the ground to be half empty, the players literally, I understand that they expect to be able to just swat aside Middlesbrough, but it just seemed all too routine for me leaving that ground yesterday. The Chelsea fans weren't really asked. They fully expected to just roll us over. They did. But yeah, I just think that gap's just unbelievable.
Yeah, and it is an interesting conversation as well. I mean, we could go on for hours about it, about sort of the general modern day football fan, actually, because if you think, you know, I don't want to sort of group sets of fans together, but if you think of that away end and obviously the result in the first leg and the stick that the players were under, and then you think of last night and the positives, there's sort of a theme amongst modern football fans that actually they sort of weirdly seem to enjoy the negatives more than they do the positives almost. And yes, okay, as you say, it's Chelsea. They have expectations far greater than ours. They've been in some historic finals, bigger finals than the Carabao Cup. But for a team and a club that's been, by their standards, in turmoil really for the past sort of 2 years, it is quite interesting that really they didn't seem to be too bothered by last night. And I just would have liked to have seen the opposing reaction had they have been knocked out, perhaps, because then maybe they wouldn't have left the ground and they would have made their sort of angers more apparent and stayed in the ground and shown their um shown their feelings that way. It's an interesting conversation, as I say, but perhaps sometimes the modern football fan is more eager to sort of be annoyed than they are actually be happy that their team's reached a final. But yeah, just wrapping up on Chelsea, I think overall the key takeaways, and I mean, we were never going to go into each individual goal and break down the individual errors because there was too many really. But a disappointing evening because of the fact that we didn't really give a good account of ourselves as what we know we're capable of. And look, I know it's a different sort of test altogether, but I do think that a performance like last night, following the first leg, almost fits into a deeper narrative in our season. And we spoke about narratives in the last podcast. And I think one major one is our inconsistencies. And you saw that last night. I mean, we defended like warriors in the first leg. And then last night, we defended like amateurs, really. And it is that inconsistency creeping in, whether you play Rotherham or whether you play Chelsea. And I think it sort of ties us in quite nicely with another topic that we're going to cover in this podcast, given the sort of fact we don't have another game on Saturday, and we probably will record once it's finished. With the inconsistencies and some of the gaps remaining in our squad, where are we left following last night's conclusion of our cup run in regards to what players are going to be coming and going, Nathan? What players do we still need? What players might still go? Of course, the main one we all know who was on the score sheet last night is still all up in the air. But I mean, with now a week to go, we're recording this on Wednesday night. I mean, where do we stand? Where do you think we still need to strengthen? Is there any positions or players in particular that you sort of be looking to almost see out the door, really? New deals, all that sort of talk. I mean, how are you feeling about our transfer window up until now and what's left to do?
Well, it's always pleasing to get a few bits of business done early. We've done that with Azaz coming in, and also Luke Ayling. We needed a right fullback to come in, so really pleased with that. And obviously, Azaz coming in, I think we sort of just expected that to be another option in the forward line, but I think we've sort of preempted Villa coming in for Rodgers. So good to get our replacement in before we've actually seen the outgoing, I suppose. Um, Finally being proactive rather than reactive. I think, as mentioned in the last podcast, in my opinion, Rodgers is certainly out the door by the end of the window. Hopefully, in the next 2 days, if I'm honest, to give you a couple of days to play around with transfers in other positions. I think it's a difficult one because obviously we'd seen the link to Diallo, and evidently there was something in that. It's not going to come to fruition, but there was something in that. So you can see that we've targeted a right-sided player there rather than a centre forward, and we haven't necessarily been linked to any centre forward so far. Now, the fan base will tell you, which is probably very similar to every other fan base in the division, that everyone's clamoring for a striker. Um, and I am of that viewpoint that we do need a centre forward. But also, now you see Isaiah Jones go down with an injury, depending on the length of that, you've now got Marcus Forss having to play off that side. And in terms of other right-sided players, you've got no one else. Got plenty of other players that can play in the 10 or on the left-hand side and cut in and do whatever from that side. But in terms of that right-hand side and sort of actually taking your man on from that side like Jones does, we don't have another option than him for the most part. Yes, Force comes back in, but played as that centre forward. Okay, if you can keep him fit, perfect, because he is a decent centre forward at this level. However, it's evidently easier said than done keeping him fit, considering he's been injured for probably 85% of the season so far. So I ideally would be looking to sign a right-sided player and a centre forward. I think that we'll get one of the two, hopefully. Um,
I was just about to say I think it'll be one or the other,
yeah,
and not to say that I don't think we necessarily need more competition on the right when you factor in that Riley McGree and Sammy Silvera are still probably going to be away for another few weeks at least, and obviously as well we don't really know to what extent Jones is injured. If he is injured for, let's say, 6 weeks, then you really are looking thin. But I do think it would be one or the other.
yeah. I am the same, that I do think it's one or the other. However, the way that this has sort of rumbled on in terms of signing players, you do see some fans sort of get a little bit tetchy about things and the failing of any links popping up. Since Diallo, really, we haven't seen any, and that was over a week ago that was quashed. So I think a lot of people will sort of be worrying. However, what I will say is you usually see a lot of things come up in those final 3 or 4 days of the window. And as they always say, people in the football industry will sort of point to the fact that things come available at the latter end of the window because teams panic, and sometimes uh, it always makes me laugh looking back at that Sunderland Till I Die documentary, and you see them panic when they're signing Grigg, and they're sort of on the phone to Wigan and they say, "Yeah, we value him at £1.5 million," and Sunderland go, "Right, we'll just pay 4." What?
Yeah,
Just yeah.
you
I,
almost as a fan sometimes, and you think because I'm guilty of it, and you're guilty of it as well. We're not saying that we aren't, but you think I wonder, and not necessarily this is going to be Middlesbrough, but in terms of the transfer window approaching the deadline, you always think, I wonder if sort of chief executives are really sort of getting a bit tetchy and a bit panicky and looking on the phone and, thinking, well, we probably could do with another player, but I'm not sure we actually need them. Oh, do you know what? I'm going to pick the phone up to an agent, see if he's still available. And then they end up somehow getting them through the door and paying more than they probably should have. And it's interesting, actually, that you say that. I was reading an article today from Sky, and they were basically saying, why is the January window this year been so quiet? Because I think it has, just in general, not just Middlesbrough, it has seemed really, really quiet. And, there's obviously the obvious talk about a financial fair play, especially in the Premier League. It seems a really big topic at the moment. But also in the article, they did mention that, like other years, there is sort of expected to be a little bit of a mad rush. And it does feel like that because you see sort of even some of the signings that teams in and around us have made. And you almost think that that level of sort of, I don't know if this will be the case with us because we have changed. And I think Kieran Scott is probably not a man that would go and panic and think, well, Hull have signed so and so, so we need to do some business to try and keep up with them. I don't think he's that kind of man at all after hearing him on BBC Tees and his sort of approach to the way that he goes about his job. But I certainly wouldn't rule it out. And as you say, I am expecting, just in general, a bit of a frantic end to the window because I think it's been that quiet that it only takes one team to go and then the dominoes will start falling in place for a lot of different other teams. And what's interesting and what I really liked about even the Luke Ayling signing is Middlesbrough, by all means, are trying to go down a route of buy cheap and sell high and grow players and improve them. But it also does show that they are willing, if an opportunity comes up and they feel that it's the right player, and even regardless of how much you value him as a source, I think he has got things correct in the past, and I do think he gets a bit of unfair credit. Alan Nixon is adamant that Middlesbrough have a bit of money to spend. And as you say, if we've tried for Diallo, there's clearly some sort of ambition to bring a forward/winger type player into the club. So, yeah, I might be trying to convince myself that it'll be exciting and it won't be, and I'll be sat on deadline day with a cup of tea on the night thinking, well, that's that then, I guess. But yeah, I hope it is exciting, and I think it will get a little bit hectic in the final week for a lot of clubs, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm honest, I thoroughly enjoyed the first few days of the window, being on top of the news and seeing the initial links and rumors going round. But as you mentioned, it has all gone quiet a little bit. And with a week to go, I think mine and your hope really is that the rumors just ramp up. And I just want to see the reaction of the fan base to Borough signing some random winger from Turkey who no one's heard of, who's probably about 19.
Yeah.
Played like 5 games but scored 6. And yeah, some nerd on Twitter says that he's a wonder kid on Football Manager, and it convinces the full fan base that he's ready to be the man that fires us into the playoffs. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. Hopefully it's not wishful thinking, but yeah, I'm hoping for one more addition in that attacking area before the window slams shut, as Sky Sports always like to tell us.
I know, God, I was expecting you to whip out a yellow tie as you reeled off that final sentence, to be honest. But yeah, I hope it is interesting. And I guess we can only wait and see. As always, do keep an eye on our social media platforms because we'll try our best to be as quick as possible and as reliable as possible in regards to the sources that we choose to put out there. Because I mean, even sometimes now we get criticised for picking up the likes of Alan Nixon. But in fairness to him, he has got things correct over the years. I mean, maybe it's not as many as what people would hope for, but he can't be completely sort of neglected as a source. But yeah, it's funny you mentioned Sunderland actually, because after the sort of big Chelsea game that's in the past now, we forgot that we conceded all them goals. It's, we'll just remember that night for the fans and not the football on the evening. But yeah, we've got a break now, but then, I mean, we're thrown straight back into the thick of it with a game that had you in the preview podcast for this return fixture almost throwing up towards the final few minutes. No one expected that scoreline that day, Nathan, of course, when we smashed 4 past them. But what sort of test are you expecting from Sunderland at the Riverside? Obviously, they seem like a team as we spoke about, that are getting a little bit tetchy now. I think to do with the manager as well, of course, but the fan base isn't happy and they are still a team. And touch wood that it remains this way, that just don't have a striker really.
Yeah, it's a funny one, isn't it? They have two or three there at the club, but just fail to sort of believe that any of them are really good enough to lead the line. Yeah, watching them on Sky on Friday night against Hull. I mean, I'm going to say the same as I did about Hull when they came to the Riverside. Wasn't impressed by them again. Liam Rossini said that it was their worst performance of the season, and they still beat Sunderland. Um, so goes to show how well Sunderland performed. The Stadium of Light ringing out with "We won't be loud." Um, and look, it's always sort of nice for me as a Middlesbrough fan to look at the northeast sides, and especially when there's meltdown involved at the other northeast clubs, it is lovely to watch. And seeing the way that Sunderland have gone about things in the last couple of months, in terms of sacking Mowbray, rolling out the red carpet for the Saudis up the road, and then getting absolutely wiped the floor with uh, in that game, and Luke O'Nien tackling a child and fist pumping the, the home fans despite being 2-0 down. I mean, it sort of goes to show um, what state they're in at this moment in time. And look, we've got 10 days nearly, I think, till that game on the Sunday. And obviously, a lot of things can change in that time. Sunderland have actually got another game before us. They play Stoke at the Stadium of Light this weekend. So that'll be interesting to see how things go in that game. But in terms of business that they want to do, as you say, probably a striker in the door for them is the top priority. But you're seeing players linked away, Pritchard being linked away heavily. It looks like that's going to happen at some stage, and it looks like there's going to be meltdown if it does happen as well. Um, Now, it will interest me massively if a Premier League side does do as mentioned there and panic and pay £20 million for Jack Clark. I think there will be meltdown if they sell him as well, and fail to obviously get the prodigal son Amad Diallo back at Sunderland. Um, so yeah, there is the possibility of massive meltdown, especially if they get beat at the weekend. And
To be fair, I'm not sure they'd act so quickly, but judging, I know you can't really assess the whole mood of the fan base judging by social media, but given that Beale out was trending in the United Kingdom the other night, who's to say if they get beat off Stoke that they may even have a caretaker manager in place by the time we play them?
yeah, they may well do. It honestly wouldn't really surprise me. But at the same time, it'll be interesting to see if they do get beat, if their owner and chairman and board decide that, yeah, we've made a mistake, and they do sack him, because I think they gave him a 3-year deal or something like that. Um, so yeah, that'll be interesting to keep an eye on. But for us, just isolating the game as it is and taking context around them out of it, it's back to league action. We don't have any more nice distractions to sort of keep an eye on. It is all about the league now. And We may have a couple of new players ourselves. We may not. We've got a week now to rest and recover in terms of injured players coming back, hopefully, as well. Hopefully, Jones isn't too serious. And we saw Dijksteel last night come back into the squad and build up his fitness a little bit with the second half performance. I hope Force was taken off just tactical rather than any sort of niggle. Um, Paddy McNair came back into the squad last week and it'll give him chance to build his fitness up. O'Brien the same. So hopefully just no injuries in training. Hopefully we can just build our fitness back up and it's full steam ahead for a big run in from now until I was going to say the end of the season, but at least until the next international break. But yeah, it's strange talking about playing Sunderland because it does seem a little bit of a while away yet, and at the minute my nerves aren't necessarily kicking in.
Probably a good job we've done this sort of straight after Chelsea, because that's sort of still in the half in the back of your mind, I should say. And with Sunderland being, as you say, still a while away, you haven't really got the chance to sort of let those nerves take over yet. So maybe we'll just start previewing sort of these types of games a month in advance, just so you aren't as nervous as you were for the preview of the last Sunderland game.
Yeah, I think the context around that maybe does need to be taken into consideration a little bit. The fact that we won a couple of games, but we were still
Yeah, I'll give you.
a bit stinking,
Yeah,
and they just I think they'd won 5-0 against Southampton and then went to Sheffield Wednesday and probably beat them in the first 15 minutes. So yeah, but I hope Jared Gillett's in charge, if I'm honest, of the game. And I'm really pleased that we've decided that we're going to cut their allocation after they did it to us at their place. I think that's really good. Fill the Riverside as much as we possibly can. Sell it out and get behind the boys and give them another pasting, please.
yeah, that would be ideal, and what an ideal way to bounce back from a Chelsea defeat as well. That would be. Yeah, Nathan. Unless there's anything else that I have missed, then I think that wraps us up. Obviously, it's a podcast that, by all means, if you've got to this stage, or if you just skipped over Chelsea and wanted to hear our thoughts on Sunderland and the transfer window, then I don't really blame you, to be honest. But yeah, it started off downbeat, ends in a way where I think, in all honesty, it's time to look forward now and look forward to the league. And as you say, there is no distractions anymore. So there's definitely some excitement to take from that. Is there anything I've missed, Nathan, before I quickly start rounding this off completely?
Not as far as I'm aware. No new links. Just yeah, we've got ourselves to a semi-final of a cup competition.
And you know what, Nathan? I tell you what I have missed. We still got further than Newcastle in the cup competition again.
We did.
At that, we'll leave it at that. And as usual, we will say, if you've watched on YouTube, please do like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you've watched on an audio, you can't watch on an audio platform, but if you've listened on an audio platform, then please do rate and review the podcast. And yes, thank you ever so much for watching and listening. Sorry that we had to relive that Chelsea performance, but I'm sure there'll be some positives coming very soon. At least I hope there will be. But yes, from me, Nathan, that has been another episode of the Boropolis podcast, and we will see you again very soon.